we begin at the very first episode of the digestive system here, chapter 23, on page 849 in my text. And we flip the page and we check out the overview here of the digestive system, beginning with the oral cavity, the pharynx, and of course we have salivary glands that add some saliva to the process. We have the esophagus coming down to the stomach. It crosses through the diaphragm just up here. Then we have the stomach going to the small intestine, beginning with the duodenum, the jejunum, the ileum. That ends the small intestine here with the ascending colon, the transverse colon, the descending colon, and we have the sigmoid colon bringing things back to the midline, and we have the rectum. Notice that I've outlined here that the vagus nerve ends at this point. The vagus nerve begins in the central nervous system in the brain. It exits the skull at the jugular foramen. It innervates the oral cavity for taste on the roof of the mouth and assists with digestion and movement of food by peristalsis all the way down through the organ systems here, all the way through the esophagus, stomach, small intestine entirely, the ascending and transverse colon, and ends here at the left colic flexure, also known as the splenic flexure. From here, the rest of the intestinal passage is innervated by the pelvic splanchnic nerve, arising from S2 to S4. And you recall that the autonomic nervous system portion, called parasympathetic, has a cranial here and a sacral here, outflow, craniosacral outflow. Okay, so the descending colon, the sigmoid colon, and the rectum and anus innervated by the pelvic splanchnic nerve. This provides you an assistance in your healthcare orientation in your profession. If you have a patient with a spinal cord injury, that means that the injury is distal to the vagus nerve, so that means the vagus is still intact and the individual gets to have digestion and absorption of food nutrients all the way to this point right here. They run into trouble here because this portion is no longer innervated, which means that they're going to have issues with passing the food beyond that point, and they might have impacted bowels that need assistance on a daily basis. Okay, then we come over and consider the work of the vagus here on page 851, and we're going to be considering two layers of the intestinal passageway, and it includes even the esophagus, the stomach, small and large intestine. There's an outer longitudinal layer, and then there's just inside of that what's called an inner longitudinal layer. It's actually an inner circular layer, excuse me. I have to rephrase that. They are both innervated by the vagus nerve. For the outer longitudinal layer, we're going to be using the vagus innervating the Auerbach's plexus, and the Auerbach's plexus will innervate the outer longitudinal layer. And this layer is dedicated to the activity of peristalsis. Then we have the vagus, again, innervating deeper into the intestinal passageway, and it's going to be innervating Meissner's plexus, which innervates the inner circular layer of the musculature, and that's going to assist with something called segmentation. Segmentation is a mixing of the food. Okay, so as we come across to this next diagram here on page 854, I'm showing you the vagus again here, cranial nerve 10, coming down, innervating just inside this outer longitudinal muscle, and this is then going to be Auerbach's plexus, Auerbach, Auerbach's plexus. This one here is going to be innervating this inner circular layer, and this one here, also innervated by vagus, is called Meissner's plexus. You can come back and take a look at that by rewinding this video. So that takes care of this outer muscularis layer. Notice that we're getting an overview of the passageways through the digestive system. The entire system out here is covered by a serosal layer. We'll get into that in a moment. That's going to be the peritoneum. Then there's the muscularis externa. The muscularis externa are these two muscles here, the outer longitudinal and the inner circular, mostly innervated by vagus until you get to the descending colon, and then it's innervated by the pelvic splanchnic nerve from S2 to S4. Okay? Deep to the muscularis externa is the submucosa, and that carries loose connective tissue, arteries, veins, nerves, and also these interesting glands right here. So then we get deep to the submucosa, and we find the mucosa. There's going to be three parts to the mucosa. There's going to be what's called the epithelial layer here, which in many cases will be a simple columnar epithelium. Once we get to the small and large intestine, that will be having the appendage of the microvilli for absorption. That's going to be an absorptive function. And through here, we have the lamina propria here, which has many capillaries and lymphatic capillaries as well as blood capillaries. And then we have what's called a muscularis mucosa, which is the dividing line between the mucosa and the submucosa. So that completes that picture right there.